If that's okay.
It is, and I guess the first thing to say is hello everyone. I'm Richard Kirby. I'm Chief Exec at Birmingham Community Healthcare, and I'll say a little more about us in a second. I've been in this role for just under 18 months. Before that, I was Chief Exec for 7 years of Walsall Healthcare, which is a combined acute and community provider trust, and some of what I want to say draws on that experience as much as on the Birmingham experience. I guess my second point by way of introduction is and I'm conscious I may be talking to some people who know just as much, if not more, about this than I do. So this is, I suppose, a kind of practical drawing together of thoughts and experience rather than necessarily claiming to assert a degree of authority or knowledge about this that you know, goes beyond others, and it'd be really helpful to have some ideas later about, you know, kind of building on some of the things I'm going to talk about. And then what I want to try and do, which is hopefully what I would ask to do and hopefully works, is just share some thoughts about policy and practice around kind of integrated care solutions that help keep people well at home and help avoid the reliance on unplanned emergency admissions, which feels to me like the billion-dollar question facing not just our health service, but many in other parts of the world, which is why I suppose I want to be clear. I'm hopefully presenting some thoughts that help. I'm certainly not presenting the billion-dollar definitive answer to the billion-dollar question, because if I had that, we might all be in a slightly different place. So if that's okay, I did first just want to say a little bit about kind of BCHC and where we and I come from without overdoing this, but it's important for some of the context. So we provide community health services to about 1.2 million people in Birmingham and also specialist services to the wider West Midlands. We run through 5 divisions, they're on the slide. For what we do, we're one of the biggest trusts in the country, so 4,500 colleagues operating from about 300 different sites. And because I think it helps by way of background, the CQC rating requires improvement overall, but a lot of good and outstanding within that. The critical bit for our context is that we spent the last year or so thinking through exactly what kind of organisation we wanted to be and what sort of services it was that we needed to be the experts in delivering in our context, and it's some of that work I'm going to talk about in a bit. The other bit of background though is just a little bit about Birmingham itself, because I in some of my experience, this approach to engaging with communities to deliver local solutions that really keep people well at home does depend heavily on the context, and having worked in sort of small towns as well as Birmingham and talked to colleagues who lead these services in the Shire counties, I think the context does matter. So, you know, we are the largest city in the UK outside London. There is an awful lot happening, whether that's Commonwealth Games or HS2 and 5G. We're the youngest city in the country by some way. So 7.6% of our population is aged under 5, but we're also at the same time, as I suspect lots of other places are, a part of the country where the population is aging rapidly. Diversity is a big issue for us. 42% of our population from black and minority ethnic communities. That rises to 60% amongst the under 5s. And for those of you who can see the kind of picture at the right-hand side of the screen as I'm looking at it, the life expectancy of our communities varies dramatically. We have some of the most affluent and some of the least affluent communities in the country, and about a 10-year difference in life expectancy, and that kind of context matters for the work we've been trying to do. Now, I don't appear to be able to move the slides on. Hang on. There we go. So to step out of the Birmingham context for a second and into the kind of wider one, it seems to be the case for doing well, the kind of things we're talking about today, is now pretty well established. Partly because, and I won't rehearse this at length because you will all know it, but this sense of kind of living in an age of morbidity in which, though people are living longer and we should celebrate that, more and more of those people are living with a range of chronic conditions that mean we have to rethink the way we provide care to support them, and the rising rates of acute hospital use can eventually place an unsustainable pressure on health and care systems, and the long-term plan makes that argument very clearly and very well, I think. I think it's worth noting it's not just a UK challenge, so just picking up examples of other countries I've had some contact with of late who are trying to tackle this same problem in similar ways: Japan, Denmark, Germany, Austria, and I'm sure one could add to that list. And the work that the Canterbury system in New Zealand has done, and that Chris Ham and Nick Timmins have written up at some length, I think provides a really kind of good example of the whole system integration. It's also worth, I think, recognising that this challenge is not a new one, and those of you who've been in the service for some time, on my 20th anniversary in the NHS, will know that each decade or so the service has a serious attempt at tackling this, and the Vanguard national programme perhaps being the most recent example of that. One of the things I want to argue in a bit is I think we've got a better chance of tackling it this decade than we've perhaps had for some time. And that's partly because the long-term plan gives us a really clear agenda in this space. So the three big things it asks of the service: really effective urgent community response and recovery services, properly integrated neighbourhood teams providing that community support and those kind of critical 30 to 50,000 populations. I'll talk a bit about primary care networks in a second. And then this model of getting the NHS support to people who live in care homes right. And I think it's significant that probably for the first time I can remember, there's a proper promise of money attached to it, notwithstanding we will all be familiar with the challenge of 4.5 billion in a national plan turning into actual real money to invest in services in a particular part of the world. So I think the long-term plan gives us a set of clear priorities. And it also, and this came out right at the end of last week, so to some extent this is the hot off the press bit, but it also comes with a I think stronger sense than we have had previously of the national delivery model. So a process for trying to track spend around the 4.5 billion, which is largely intended to draw on the mental health funding guarantee, which I think has its challenges, but looks like it's getting some traction. Perhaps most importantly, a national plan to drive delivery around those priorities I've just talked about, and I think the sector has a lot of confidence in Matthew Wynn's leadership of that plan. And then a sense that we've got nearly 1,300 primary care networks, which for the first time probably gives us a structure for working with general practice in all its kind of delight to make some real progress. Talking to my colleagues, I think there's quite a strong sense that in some parts of the country, the process of putting primary care networks together has been a challenge because it's cut across some existing arrangements that were in place. In others, and I've put Birmingham in this category, it's been a really helpful process that's enabled us to develop a kind of strong neighbourhood structure, and there are no doubt other places where the experience has been more mixed, but the fact that we're kind of there, I think, gives us a strong base from which to build. And so what I wanted to go on and do was share a bit of the work we're doing in Birmingham, and then some reflections on it, and then hopefully some of the conversation that follows. So we started in Birmingham a year or so ago from a highly critical system review of care for older people. It's on the CQC's website if people want to have a look at it, but it said in terms that the system in Birmingham was failing older people. Some of the work we did following that, supported by Newton Europe as a redesign consultant, generated some of the numbers you can see on the slide. So, you know, amongst our older people in hospital beds, 23% could have been treated in an alternative service. 37% of people receiving long-term social care packages would have benefited from reablement. Over half the people on the general medical wards are medically fit for discharge. Hang on, slides are jumping around without my altering. So I'm not quite sure what's happening with the slides, but I'm not doing it. Let's see if I can get us back to, there we go. And out of that sense that we were just not doing a good enough job in Birmingham, grew a partnership of the health and social care organisations, including the council, including, sorry, I'm not sure what's happening with my slides, but
don't worry, Richard. What I'll do is let me see if I can. It's very strange.
Yeah, let me hang on. They're back under my control, I think. So I'll keep trying.
If anyone's clicking in and around them, just try not to, because it might be somebody roguely clicking through them.
Yeah. So it grew a sense that we needed to take a different approach to this in Birmingham. We needed a concerted, coherent, if you like, kind of program to make change, which we've based on three important strands, and I'll probably talk most about the ongoing personalised support one, but just to describe the whole picture for you. So there's a first strand that's largely led by local authority colleagues that's looking at those universal services that support people to stay well in communities. Jumping around again. Call it prevention. It's largely based on a set of neighbourhood network support that tries to make connections between the local voluntary and community sector, and then social care and health. We've got it operating in 4 of Birmingham's 10 parliamentary constituencies, and it's starting, I think, to do good work and show some results. The next chunk focuses on a set of early intervention services, which are essentially our change programme for intermediate care and rapid response, so that we avoid admissions or discharge, promote reablement. And it's a redesign of both our intermediate care in the community to try to rely less on beds full stop, and those intermediate care beds that we have, so that we have fewer different types of beds in fewer places operating to a more coherent model, and I'll come back to that in a minute. We're also then looking hard at the services that help older people live well at home on an ongoing basis, and that's about integrated neighbourhood teams that enhance care home support, and the relationships with the PCN become critical there. I think the thing to say about the early intervention work in particular is we've gone about that by trying to create a set of change teams led by our own staff from the bottom up, and the work we have been doing to test new models of intermediate care appears to be delivering some interesting and exciting results. So it's small scale stuff. We've only cared for about 60 people on hospital discharge through the new intermediate care model, but they've all gone home significantly faster than they previously would, and none of them have yet needed ongoing social care support after the 6 weeks of reablement and rehabilitation at home that we've been providing. Now, I want to be a bit cautious about that, because we've, you know, it's a small scale test of change rather than a randomised control trial that proves the model works, but it appears to be producing a much better result for this small group of people, and then the task, of course, for us becomes how we scale that up. So it is an offer for the whole city, and I'll come back to that in a bit as well. The next thing I just wanted to offer a thought or two about was the sort of complexity of the neighbourhood in in a city. So if one element of what we've been doing has been getting the intermediate care right, the other element's been getting our neighbourhood teams aligned to primary care networks right. And the detail of this picture perhaps matters less than the fact that there's lots of dots and they all overlap. So it's designed to show by postcode area where the patients who are registered with each of our PCNs are, to help us construct sensible teams around those. And it's part of South Birmingham. In fact, it's the part I live in. I'm one of those green blobs somewhere. But that sense of a whole set of communities and people and populations that overlap, of GP practice populations that aren't easily always definable by geography, and need some careful local negotiation to construct sensible teams is largely the point I was hoping to make from this map. My sort of prejudice is if you're working in the Shire counties, it's sort of easier because there's a stronger sense of natural communities around small towns. But I suspect this sense of trying to define place and neighbourhoods and then organise teams around them is a challenge for all of us working in this space, actually. And I'll perhaps again come back to that in some of the thoughts I want to offer. So what have we learned from Birmingham so far? Well, I think we've learned via the small scale work, as I was saying, that this does appear to work and that we have got models of care that do work and do have potential and are worth us continuing to pursue. So I've mentioned we've seen a much reduced long-term use of social care on discharge for a small group of people. We're also seeing a steady increase in the uptake of our rapid response team, largely based on some of my Walsall experience, where we work really closely with the local ambulance service to support them to refer patients to the rapid response team instead of taking the hospital with some success. And we've got, I think, some emerging evidence that our care planning for people with chronic conditions is stronger, that we're using virtual MDTs within neighbourhoods to get professionals together and agree the right kinds of plans for those people. I think really importantly we've learned, in some cases slightly the hard way, that relationships between the clinical teams and between clinicians in the neighbourhoods are actually more important in this work than structures, PIDs, PMOs, standard operating procedures. And although you need those things, if you don't invest the time in building the relationships between the team in the neighbourhood, all the rest of it feels much harder. And that's, I guess, linked to my next point, which is that we've also learned that that takes time and takes longer, I think, than I thought it was going to. And at times it's been a bit frustrating that it's taken that sort of time, but that commitment to helping people work out how to work together, work out how they want to work together in a particular place is really important. As is the need for a different approach to the stage we've been in, which is a set of small-scale sort of tests of change type processes, through to a much larger scale rollout across whole localities or the whole 1.2 million people in the city. And we're just at the cusp from, we've learned enough from the small scale test of change to thinking through the larger scale rollout. And I guess the last bit I'd say is sometimes that whole process of settling on what constitutes the neighbourhood, what is the place, particularly maybe in a large urban environment, is complex, is messy, and it takes a willingness to make it work together, and a lot of compromise and a lot of time spent with partners and colleagues working that through. So what might I try and draw out from all of this before we have a bit of discussion about it? Well, I think it's pretty clear now that there is a good enough body of evidence and practical experience that the new community models of care are the right ones, are the ones we should be seeking to deliver, and can work if we get it right. You know, it's kind of good enough to crack on with rather than ponder about. I genuinely believe the long-term plan and the funding guarantee and the community programme give us the strongest national policy framework we have had for making these changes for many years. There's a sense to pinch the title of one of the national reports that our time has come. Understanding place and developing neighbourhoods that are meaningful and mean something to people who work in them and live in them really does matter, as do relationships between professionals, which take time. And maybe the last point is in some ways an obvious one, but it bears repeating, I think, in that the work I've just been talking about in Birmingham has taken my trust and the Mental Health Trust and Social Care and the Acute Trust and representatives of primary care, a good 18 months of hard work together to get to this point. And at various points on that journey, we've had to take one for the team, as it were, in order to deliver the objective we're aiming for the system. And that's taken some hard work and some difficult conversations and some strong system leadership from the group of chief execs. So I think it's, if you like, in summary, it's clear, I think, what we should do, and it's clear it can work if we do it well. There are some really important things to getting it right: strong system leadership, really strong local relationships between professionals, and that proper understanding of the neighbourhood that I would pull out. And the last slide is just a photograph of the new intermediate care team drawn from my trust, from mental health and social care, for one of our neighbourhoods, looking kind of excited and smiling and ready to go. So I thought I'd just share that as a uplifting final slide before handing over, Danny, to you to manage the conversation that follows.